This Week in Radio Tech, episode 185, is brought to you by the Axia Rack and Desk audio consoles. Small size, small price, but big where it counts. Perfect audio and broadcaster tough on the web at axiaaudio.com.
And now, our feature presentation.
Twert.
Ever watch over 67 outgoing program channels or build a bulletproof radio remote kit for the Olympics? Mitch Glider has, and he's here to talk about it.
All right, calm down. He says that to everyone.
This calls for immediate discussion.
What's up, Dad?
All your days are belong to us.
From his palatial office of important business,
or in a choice hotel in a distant land,
this is Kirk Harnack.
Tom Ray and Chris Tobin join me to meet Mitch Glider, VP of Engineering for Westwood One in New York City.
You're dialed in to This Week in Radio Tech.
Hey, welcome in. It's time for This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. This is the show where we talk about, obviously, radio technology. You know the drill, everything from the microphone to the antenna at the top of the tower to now whatever server it is that feeds the world over the internet, all kinds of things like that. And sometimes we even talk about taking out the trash, all the things that engineers are called on to do. This is our 185th episode. Woohoo! Whoever thought we'd be going this long? Also on the show with us, here from the beginning, one of our co-hosts, the best dressed engineer in radio. He's in studio at the GFQ network this evening. It's Chris Tobin. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Hello, Kirk. Yes, I'm in studio and making room for everybody and having a good time. I'm just getting back from my CCB trip from last week in Barrie, Ontario.
We talked about that last week. Yes, we had a fireside chat last week about that.
Yes, it was a good time. Very good time.
All right. Also, another co-host on the show. He makes it in when he can. He's a busy man. Tom Ray from the Hudson Valley of New York. Hey, Tom, welcome in from your ham shack.
I make it in not only when I can, but when you call me to remind me, because I'm sitting upstairs reading a book and I forgot that today was Thursday.
Tom, it's Thursday.
Yeah, it's been one of those weeks. And you said before that, we know the drill, so you'll have to pardon me. I need to go out to the garage to get the drill. But anyway, I'm president of Tom Ray Broadcast Consulting, and here I am. And yes, I'm the resident wise guy. So,
hey, you're going to fill us in maybe on this show, maybe another, about your new position. Do you have a new job you're doing?
Well, I've got several jobs I'm doing. Like with my company, I do many things.
Okay. Well,
which one are you referring?
I thought there was a relationship you had with Burke now.
Oh yeah, and actually I've had that for a little while. I am an independent rep for Burke, and if anybody has any questions, you may feel free to contact me either through Burke's website. TomRay@Burke.com, or you can contact me at TomRay@TomRayConsulting.com, and I'm happy to work with you and make sure you have the proper configuration to make sure life is good and you can control the transmitter.
Well, we will talk about, in fact, we ought to do a show about remote control. We've done one in the past. In fact, Doug Irwin was our guest many, many shows back for a show about remote control. And we should bring that subject up again, because times are changing and technology is changing. And it's interesting to see what we can do now from our cell phone or iPad or still from the point of remote control at the radio station. Hey, also, we've got a guest. This is the guy. What's that? What's that, Tom?
I was going to say, let me talk to Peter Burke, and we ought to get him on the show. He's a real fascinating guy to talk with.
That'd be a great idea. The world respects Peter Burke. He really wrote the book on a lot of remote control concepts and ideas, and I've used his remote controls for years and years. Hey, I'm excited about our guest. I billed this fella as the world's most awesome remote engineer, and maybe not what you think. This guy, we're going to bring him in right now. Mitch Glider from New York City. We got a whole New York crew except me today. Hey, Mitch, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good for you to spend an hour to be with us. Mitch, you're the VP of Engineering for New York City for this name we've heard before, and we're here again, Westwood One.
Well, yes, we are Westwood One once again. Without spending the entire hour, we were merged with Dial Global about a year and a half ago, and the name stood. And recently they changed the name back to Westwood One for market familiarity, for lack of a better term. And of course, now we have the larger situation where Cumulus is now made Westwood One under its umbrella. So, we can get into that a little bit or not, or a little later or whatever. But I'm kind of just sitting back and waiting to see how that all pans out. And I've been through it before. I was working for CBS when the original Westwood One did their dealings with them back in like 97 and 98, and then of course Dial Global a couple of years ago, and now this latest Cumulus merge. And I have a lot going on, which we can get into anytime you want. So for now, just sit back and, as I like to say, enjoy the ride.
Well, then we're going to get right into it quickly, because when you and I got to visit in New York, was it last week?
Yes.
It was last week, right? Okay. Yeah, we've been through a weekend since then. Last week, and I found out things about you and your expertise that I didn't know. Now, I'd been to the CBS Broadcast Center, which houses what we're now calling Westwood One, and the radio operations, the distribution operations. In fact, if you're a viewer here and you follow, say, my Facebook feed or our Twitter feed, we've had some pictures up there. We had a picture of just a whole bunch of Telos Zephyr Extremes married with international data casting event managers. These are boxes that, when put all together and the outputs of them muxed together, they go to an uplink and make a radio network, which I think is just fascinating. In fact, tell you what, I saw that equipment some years ago, Mitch, and you showed me around. I got a little taste of what you had put together there. Why don't you kind of run through that for us? Tell me about the distribution equipment and what you guys do there in New York at Westwood One.
Sure. Basically, we are a content aggregator, for lack of a better term. We have some of the content is local to the broadcast center. As an example, the CBS Radio News Network, or NCAA or NFL sports. But also we backhaul our content from various other locations. And the end result is via an audio router. We route that audio to individual Zephyr Extremes, as you mentioned, which then get muxed into an IDC encapsulator and go up to the ever-famous AMC8, where we are currently using what's called the Max receiver, and that's 4 independent outputs that are tunable by the affiliate, and we do some channel changing and not really show shifting, copy splits, normal stuff like that. That's really the gist of it. We are, among many other things at the broadcast center, we are the head end for the IDC receivers, as opposed to the other end of Westwood One up in Denver, which has another head end with the Wegener system, which
okay.
So, but in terms of Westwood One in New York, we are an IDC house, and we are using the Telos Zephyr Extremes as codecs for the head end. And as you saw, we have 67 outgoing channels with 10 backup channels. So that's the famous picture with those racks and racks of Zephyr Extremes. I will tell you that we have yet to RMA one. There's a plug for you. We're very happy.
Okay, well, good. So okay, let me get some more of this straight. You said you're an aggregator, so you bring in audio content from all over the place. A lot of it right there produced in New York, but others come in from other venues, locations, other networks who use you for distribution. What are some of the show names that we might recognize? You mentioned NCAA sports. What are some of the other shows that you distribute we might recognize?
I would say, like, for instance, from content that's not directly owned by Westwood One, as an example, the Wall Street Journal, we distribute, and they have a lot of long form and short form stuff, as well as a lot of sports teams, both baseball, football, hockey, Seattle Seahawks, the Boston Bruins, the New York Yankees, New York Mets, just to name a few. We kind of segregate out in our own heads, we call them our brokered clients. Most of that is passed through. What they send us in terms of audio and relays, we turn it right around. Then there are other clients where we run inventory via automation systems and other things. Just really depends. But that's really the main thing. It's a lot of sports. There are some one-off shows that, those are smaller, but I hope that answers your question. It's really
So when you receive content programming from other content creators, other networks, if you will. What typically, how does this come into your facility? I'm sure some of it over ISDN and Zephyrs and that kind of thing, but what other types of gear are used to get the audio in?
That's a great question. Just about everything. It's really easy. Everything from straight ISDN to, let's say, a point-to-point T1 in its most familiar sense, using, like, let's say, Interplex equipment. But more recently, Westwood One has launched a pretty extensive private MPLS network, and that's where things have really gotten interesting, because we've tied all of our technical operations centers together, along with our primary customers. We're converting over to MPLS. So instead of having a point-to-point T1 with Interplex equipment, a great example, again, giving a little shout out to the sponsor, we just installed a few Telos zips all around the country for some talk show hosts and some other things, and it's working out very nicely. So, but that's not how it is for most. It's starting to become more popular. ISDN and T1, I would say. When it's T1, it's ISDN backup. When it's ISDN, a lot of times it's IP over internet backup. So that's
okay. So a lot of shows, a lot of networks who use Westwood One to distribute, they've got two paths. They've got a main and a backup way to get audio to you.
Yeah, especially for the larger clients, they're like any other network or radio station, they're carrying inventory. Inventory has money attached to it. So you need to protect that investment. And, there's no excuse for a loss of inventory, as we all know in the network industry.
Now, I got the impression when I was visiting, I guess I really didn't get this clear, but after you aggregate all these programs together and you're coding them with the encoders, they happen to be the Telos Extremes, and adding contact closure and break information, they get muxed together. Mux, I guess, is the right word. What does that process involve? What's muxing together mean exactly?
Muxing to me is from the simplest term, and anybody that knows me knows that I might not always use the most technical terms, but muxing sounds a lot like mixing. And what we're doing is we're taking these individual IP streams, and we're combining them into one stream, and that's going into an encapsulator and then to a fairly normal RF chain up to the roof. We actually have two dishes on the roof with two 750-watt pole-mounted amplifiers, and that's what we call path A and B. And we have a tertiary uplink, believe it or not, in Valencia, California, that we backhaul that via a proprietary point-to-point 10 meg IP link. So that's really the best way to describe it. IDC is taking all these individual IP streams and mixing them together and giving them their PIDs and their various things that you need to to delineate the channels as it goes out over that type of network. And the receivers are designed to demux it. I think the best way I know how to explain it.
So when you have these 67 channels, and maybe you can give us a sense of what kind of bit rate are these channels being coded into, and what's the coding algorithm typically used?
The coding is ACC.
Okay.
And believe it or not, it's 64 joint stereo, and just because of the way that we're feeding the codecs and the way that they're, the way that IDC handles it, it sounds fantastic, that's why we're able to, in my opinion, squeeze the amount of channels that we have, along with, pure data stream, with, the carrier sizes that we're going with. And, that's an important element, because as we all know, satellite time and bandwidth are extremely expensive. So, and again, for everybody that knows me, I would not even pretend to say that I am the end-all expert on the whole RF chain. But from a practical point of view, it's my responsibility to not only originally design and build that room and wire it and make sure that everything is to spec, but me and my staff do maintain that, along with the broadcast IT people that we're all teamed up with at the broadcast center, because it is kind of a hybrid system. in terms of engineering and pure IT VLANs and stuff like that. So it's pretty complicated.
So after you get 67 channels, each coded at about 64 kilobits. So what's the aggregate? What's the mux data rate? It must be under 10 megabits because that's the speed of your backup link to California.
Yeah, you know what? Again, in front of all the millions of people that are watching this, again, everybody knows me. I'm not even going to backpedal, Kurt. You know what? I don't know those numbers. I'm you know, kind of the type of guy that is familiar with the system to the point where the installation and the maintenance and everything like that. And there are other members of our team that have all that information. So,
well, here's what I figured. 64 kilobits per second. There's probably some encapsulation and some, overhead on top of that. I'm guessing. So there's probably about 6 to 7 megabits per second is the total uplink.
Yeah, and I would say that also the overall size of the carrier, is up in the 5 meg range.
Yeah. Okay.
So for all those that know how to do that kind of math and that kind of stuff, I think everybody gets the picture. It's a very efficient system, and that's one of the reasons why originally it was chosen, because of the amount of bang for the buck we can get out of that amount of bandwidth and everything like that. And that that's really the basic concept behind that whole IDC system.
So a couple questions from the chat room have popped in here, and this is coming from VTENG in the chat room. By the way, if you're watching the show, if you ever watch the show live or listen live, you can participate in the chat room on this show, as any GFQ show. Just go to gfqlive.tv, and the video for the show will pop up, and also the chat room. You can go in there. You can be anonymous. You can give yourself your own name if you want to. I'm always Kirk Harnack in the chat room, and ask a question. A couple of good questions come in. We've been told that we are one tech retiring away from no one knowing anything about ISDN. How is that working for Westwood One and New York City? Is New York City one tech away from not knowing anything about ISDN?
Well, I don't know about that. We recently had a pretty high-level conference call with Verizon, as an example, regarding ISDN, and people that were on the phone included people like Ren Burke, who's one of the top guys, telecom guys in CBS, myself, Eric Weiler, who was also the senior vice president of engineering and operations for all of Westwood One, and a bunch of other people. And to make this as quick as possible, Verizon claims that you can no longer order what they call a standard ISDN. They're calling it a Centrex ISDN now. And really, for the average user, it just means that you have to dial, I believe it's always a 9, and then the standard number. But the big thing about ISDN is that everybody says it's going away. We believe it's going to go away. That's why all of us are embracing the IP codec. Not only over the public internet, but as I said before, with private networks. And I know Mr. Tobin is always smiling when he hears that, because he's one of the guys in my career, and I'll give Chris a little plug, that when he was not only my boss at Westwood One, but later on, always on the cutting edge of the whole IP thing. So to answer your question, we use ISDN a lot. We rely on it a lot. We still find it very reliable. We're still able to order and get lines dropped almost everywhere. Verizon's made it a little different. AT&T has made it difficult because in some areas, yes, it is true, they're just not offering it anymore, and they have increased the prices a little bit. I will tell you, and I can speak for most of the engineering team across the country for Westwood One, that we are all about the IP codec, public internet, and MPLS. And again, as Mr. Tobin smiles even more, I'm sure, this is something that he not only predicted, but was pushing for a long time ago. Like when the Comrex Access first came out, actually, probably even the bricks and some other things like that. That was it. So the ISDNs, we have them, and we're still purchasing new ISDN units, from time to time. But our focus is on IP.
Hey, Chris Tobin, he and I were talking earlier about levels. I wondered, Chris, you used to work in the same building. Did you guys do any audio processing before these things would hit the uplink?
At the time I was there, the processing was just wideband, nothing. It was just very light. I mean, you wouldn't even noticed it.
What's going on, Mitch? What's going on now? Do you guys process the feeds that come in, or let them go at the level that the content creator sends them to you?
I'll tell you what we do is, for a long time we were using compellers, just to kind of more as a limiter, obviously, and not so much as any kind of compression, because we want to leave that for the end user, meaning the radio station. But now we are using, because all of our encoders are fed by our 32KD router, and there is a new card that they came out with recently that's called a KFX card, which I did help them develop, and I'm proud to say that. And it has an AGC built into it that is just absolutely outstanding. You don't hear it. It just kind of protects everything from clipping, and it's exactly what we want. We want a how low do you want to go get it? Where do you want to try to maintain it at? And how loud is it allowed to get? And again, for people that know me, I like simple, I like knobs, I like buttons. Now, even though this is a piece of software, it's not complicated. The compellers, as we all know, were great, but me being a former recording engineer, every time I saw the word gate, I thought of one thing, and as we all know, that it meant a completely different thing. So that's all we're doing. We're just protecting from overmodulation going out to the network. We're allowing the radio stations to do what they want. But I will tell you this, that we have now some of the most consistent levels going out across all of our channels, and that's for everything. That's for sports, that's for talk, that's everything. And we're very proud of that, because there was times for many years, and not just our network, all radio networks, where you really never knew what level you were going to get. And it was difficult when you were automating shows and you didn't have somebody sitting there riding the fader, so to speak. And now with a lot of automated stations, they are relying on us to give them something somewhat reasonably level. So that's what we're using. We're using in the box AGCs.
Maybe, and we've talked about this kind of subject before, but it's interesting when you're dealing with so many dozens and dozens and dozens of channels, and you're thinking about levels, kind of in the aggregate. Tom and Chris, my thought is, back in the days when everything was pretty much analog, we didn't really have there was a clip point, but we always operated pretty far below that clip point, and we had the VU meter to interpret. And we had different VU, not all meters followed the proper VU ballistic. And different amounts of density would cause different action of the VU meter. Now we have 0 dBFS as the top scale. And it doesn't matter if your digital system is 16-bit or 20-bit or 24-bit. 0 dBFS is still 0 dBFS no matter how many bits that, it goes down to the bottom. So I guess my point there is, we have a level now, because things are all digital, that you cannot go above. It will not go above, and you really don't even want to tickle that level. So it's in my view, and hey, in dealing with a lot of Axia systems, as I've dealt with, I find that levels just tend to be more consistent than ever before, because there's nothing in the router, there's nothing in the distribution system that's going to wander about and change, and you've got to go tweak on a little potentiometer on a distribution amp. I guess the point I'm getting at in here is that with digital technology and finally getting things settled out and sorted out, it seems to me that level problems tend to be less now than they were, say, in the 80s. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that'd be true. But, the industries have changed. The way people do things have changed. So, back in the day when I worked for a different network, our audio levels were such that we referenced the VU, and we had a PPM meter for the absolute peaks, as Mitch pointed out, for final transmission to the satellite, but also for the end user, the radio stations, and wherever distribution was taking it. But over time, as the 0 dB full scale came into play, which, on DAT machines that we had at the time and some other digital systems, it was a learning curve. And then the hardest part was, if not at the network level, at the end user level, and how they interpreted the 0 dB full scale. You had back in the day. Well, 10 years ago, you had three different reference points for 0 dB full scale. You had the minus 20, which was the SMPTE. Then you had minus 14, which I think was Panasonic. Then there was the minus 12, which I think was Sony, Toshiba, Hitachi, depending on who you talk to. So try and figure out which of those three was best. Most people wound up with the Panasonic one for some reason. It just didn't work out well. But if you're a distribution or content provider like, as Mitch is doing and what I did in the past, you wound up going with something like SMPTE, which totally screwed everybody up because nobody really followed it unless you were working in the cinema world. And then they had their own reference, minus 24. So
oh gee.
So it's interesting how things have evolved, and Mitch knows all too well, and he and I worked together for some time. So battling levels and understanding references and what's best practice can sometimes be a very subjective decision.
Chris, are you finding that? I'm sorry, that minus 20. I'm finding more and more that because a lot of analog systems still have, let's say, 20 dB of headroom. For instance, going into an audio router, that I'm seeing more and more that they're trying to keep the, let's say, the minus 20 to 0 analog, reference. I'm seeing a lot more minus 20 is what I'm getting at.
Yes. You're absolutely right. In the last couple of years, I will tell you that I too have noticed the same. Probably the last 3 or 4 years, it's become more prevalent. But prior to that, it was somewhat at times a mixed bag. But yeah, minus 20 seems to be working out for everybody. I'm not
Tom, sure. Same 20, on either side, digital or analog. I guess that's
that's probably it. Tom would know too because he's
Tom. You ran some networks there. WOR. I'm speaking from the point of view of an affiliate at small town talk radio AM stations where we would take shows from all kinds of different networks, and from network to network, or even from show to show on the same network. Levels were just all over the place. It was really, really pathetic and hard to run, and especially if I was using the same satellite receiver. If I had a satellite receiver dedicated for each network, I could set the level for the show we were taking from that network, or a different receiver for each show. But we didn't. We had these tunable receivers, right? And so you'd have this broadcast tools box that would tell the receiver, "Hey, tune to this. Hey, tune to this." And so different shows on the same receiver output would come in at wildly different, 10, 12, 16 dB different levels. And what a pain to deal with at the affiliate level. Now, I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead. Tell us what your experience was at the WOR network.
Well, the WOR network, and also I'm involved with an independently syndicated show on the weekends, The Car Doctor. And what we do is we run a compeller in the studio in limit mode, just so we in case we get that one caller that just unexpectedly just comes screaming through the board, if that line is really hot for whatever reason, so we can protect the IP link going over to the satellite uplink. But we run the IP link going over to the satellite uplink at minus peak level, -6, consistent. That's where pretty much brick walls. And with talk radio, I find music radio too, but with talk radio, you can get away with a little more than you can with the music side. And of course, we try to keep the level up as high as possible because the higher your level, the more definition you have in in the digital sampling. It's a balancing point. It really is a balancing point. But we try to keep things as consistent as possible. And actually, we do a pretty good job. I've listened to some of the satellite downlink from what we do, and it sounds good. And at WR, the same thing. We ran a set of compellers in limit mode, and into the we used a Mosley T1 box to get it over to Cumulus. Well, now Cumulus, but then ABC satellite, and we ran that at about -6 going over there. So, gave us about 6 dB headroom in case the limiter overshot. So,
Well, I really didn't mean to beat this dead horse, but all this information is interesting, especially to me when Mitch is running 67 channels of audio. How do you manage all that? Hey, folks, you're watching This Week in Radio Tech or listening to it if you downloaded the podcast. It's the show every week where we talk about radio technology, engineering to keep the radio world going. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. Along with me are Chris Tobin in studio in Queens, New York at the GFQ studios. Also, Tom Ray is with us from his abode in Hudson Valley, New York. And Mitch Glider, the VP of Engineering at New York City's Westwood One, is our guest on this show. We're going to continue our show and talk to Mitch about remote broadcast, because this is where Mitch's experience and expertise really shine. And we're going to find out some very cool things about building systems for flexibility that you can ship literally halfway around the world and produce hundreds of hours of remote content from something as exciting as, say, the Olympics. And Mitch is going to tell us how that works. This is fascinating stuff, so stick with us. Our show is brought to you by Axia, the folks who also are part of the Telos Alliance. Axia makes, as you know, audio consoles that are connected by IP. And I want to talk particularly about the Axia small consoles. These are so cool. The Axia Rack, RAQ, and the Desk, DESQ. Maybe we have pictures of the rack and the desk somewhere there on the website. I don't know. The rack and the desk are these small consoles. I own one of these myself, the Rack, RAQ, at our station in American Samoa. I use this small console in our newsroom. Our news director there, Monica Miller, she has this little console right in front of her. You know, she used to have one of these Dixon news mixers, and it worked fine for years, but it's analog technology. We'd get hums and buzzes and things because maybe I didn't hook something up right. I don't know. But this digital console, this Rack console, rack-mounted 6 faders, and it still, produces mix minus automatically for her phone calls and codec remotes. And it uses a beautiful little small engine, the Core 16, Core spelled QOR. It has analog and AES inputs built into it, as well as mic level inputs. And it has analog and an AES output built into it as well as live wire, too. Plus, an Ethernet switch is built right into the Core 16 little engine from Axia. Now, the console's so cute. The Rack is a 19-inch wide, 6 faders. It's got OLED VU meters, and there's also informational stuff on those VU meters, clock, for example. And you have a couple of buses, program bus 1 and 2, plus a preview bus. So it's really just everything you need in a small console. I've been to other stations, say in Dallas, Texas, where they have a number of these rolled out in their news and news production areas. There's a companion console to the Rack. Again, that's spelled RAQ. It's kind of IKEA-like, right? It's called the Desk, DESQ. And the Desk is also 6 faders. It's really very similar to the Rack, except instead of round knobs like the Rack has, the Desk has linear faders. Yes, you see that being held right there by the gentleman on the screen. And so this takes up a pretty small footprint on your desk. Your DESK desk. And so you can have a small console right there. You've got OLEDs for each individual input. You can see the pre-fader level. You can see a talkback level if you want to. You can, right there from the console itself, change it to an input, for example, to left only or left plus right, or board back to stereo. A lot of options right there. It's very powerful, and yet it's very simple to use. A lot of power under the hood and very easy for the operator to use. Here's what's really slick. You can use one engine, either the Core 16 or the Core 32, and to that one engine, you can connect 2 audio consoles and have them in 2 separate rooms. So one engine handles the mixing capabilities, the input and the output necessities for 2 of these small consoles. So check them out on the Axia website. Go to axiaaudio.com. You'll see that these are inexpensive. I'm sorry I don't have the pricing in front of me. Your dealer would have to tell you that. But when you hook 2 consoles together, 2 surfaces, to one Core 16, you have a very inexpensive console that's very powerful and connected right up to the live wire network. So it'll talk just fine to Element consoles, to VX phone systems, to Zip 1 codecs and Extreme codecs, to anything that's to nodes and our new X nodes, anything that's part of the Axia live wire world, it'll connect right up to. But automation systems too. No big fancy wiring, just a click Ethernet cable in the back. Check it out, axiaaudio.com, the desk and the rack consoles. You're going to love yours as much as I love mine. I've had no service calls on the thing. I put it on the air, over a year ago. It was August of 2012 that I put that console in American Samoa, and it just sits there and runs. All right. Thanks to Axia for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. It's episode 185. We're talking to Mitch Glider at Westwood One about remote broadcast now in the second half of our show. Mitch, this is pretty cool. You were telling me some stories about remotes past and remotes future, and these aren't your ordinary Ford dealer or shopping center remotes. These are a little bit bigger. Tell me about them.
Okay, well, really what I'm involved with are two primary large-scale remotes. One is to support the CBS Radio Network News for mostly their coverage of large-scale news events like political conventions, but we have covered other things like the royal wedding and the last space shuttle launch, as an example. And then, of course, what you're referring to is my experience covering the Olympics for Westwood One. And that started back in 2002 with yours truly sitting there, Mr. Tobin, and I, using, back then, a McCurdy intercom system and an old SAS router. Chris will know it's a 32,000 maybe, I'm thinking.
Yes, 32,000.
But anyway, to make a long story very relatively short, my passion for that kind of was brought out in that first 2000 convention and 2002 Olympics. And the way that we do things is that we set everything up in a staging area in New York. And when I say everything, I mean everything from a full console to smaller consoles. We happen to use the SAS integrated system, which would be like the 32KD, Rios, their ICM 32s. They also have a small console they call Ruby T that's similar to the rack thing that Kurt was talking about. And essentially what we set up as an example, because I know we're probably running out of time, we set up a full long-form studio with a control room in the studio. This will be out in Sochi this year, along with some read-in positions that actually take in audio and edit it and set up clips, and also what we call a short form and update studio. So the content that's going out, to put it in perspective, is every 20 minutes we would provide an update, an Olympic update via the network to all the stations. There'd also be live play-by-play like hockey or basketball or something like that, as well as kind of a wrap-up show that typically most radio stations would not take live, but would pre-tape and play back another time. So the point is that all the audio and content and and everything is coming from the IBC. In this case, it would be Sochi. Now, my big thing is as we all know, whether you're using an Axia system, an SAS system, a Wheatstone system, it doesn't matter. The days of shielded 2-pair cable or 12-pair GEPCO are pretty much over for all of us. This is the world of Cat5 and Cat5e. And what I've been doing for a few years now is using the black box standard for multi-pair Cat5e, which gives you 6 LANs, and essentially running stage snakes to various locations. And I mentioned stage snake because Whirlwind built me a custom breakout box where we would bring multi-pair Cat5 from our rack room that we set up, and we would plug it into this little stage box, and it would give us, with 2 cables, 12 RJ45s. Now, what we did is we certify all this to Cat5e for standard computer data, and as we all know, if it's good enough for a computer, it's good enough for an Axia system, it's good enough for SAS, it's good enough for any radio audio routing system. We carry data, we carry analog audio, we carry digital audio. So if you could just picture a small studio setup where I need 2 LAN connections, one for a printer and one for a computer, and then I have 2 data lines for the SAS Ruby T, and et cetera, maybe some audio, audio outputs and inputs. That's all pre-patched. There's a series of racks that have RJ45 panels, and that is kind of our claim to fame. So what we do is we break up the racks into separate transmission rack, and then maybe the main rack, which would have the router, and then a comms rack. And the beauty of this is that Westwood One has a system as well as CBS Radio Networks. They are twins. So if we have a larger event, we combine them, we borrow from each other. It's just a really interesting way to break out all the things, and it's all Cat 5 based. So that's really most excited about. I will tell you one thing. As an example, for Sochi, our transmission back to New York, which I think might be a big question for some of the listeners and watchers, we're going with ISDN and IP. We're using Zephyr Extremes and Telos Zips. And we don't really know which one's going to be the backup yet, folks. That's the interesting part about all this. The Zips are going to go over the public internet, obviously, and the Extremes, obviously ISDNs. I've been to a few Olympics. I've been, I've done Torino, Italy. I've done Athens, Greece, and the ISDNs, it's hit or miss. So that's really what's happening for us at Westwood One is we will stage all that equipment in our broadcast center, and what Chris knows, affectionately known as Old Six. It's an old, ripped-out studio that they swore they were going to rebuild one day. And starting way back in the day, before Chris and me, and every time somebody would want to try to build something out there, we would just say, you can't, because it's a huge open staging area. And we literally set everything up, all the computers, all the routing equipment, everything, and we play the game that we used to play when we were a kid. It's called Kick the Plug. And why do we do that? Because sooner or later, the IBC and all the power is going to go down before we get to shut anything down properly. So that is our final test of staging, is without shutting down any servers or any computers or any of the routing equipment or any of the codecs. I just kick the plug out of the wall, everything goes dark, I plug it back in, we bring everything back up, and if everything comes back up in some reasonable amount of consistency, then the rig is ready to go.
That's a great test. I love testing that way.
Yeah. And especially actually physically kicking the plug. Now, that's better than pulling it out, because kicking it involves malice, and you want to make sure that the equipment will come back up after the malice.
Well, the kicking would simulate one of the two, either somebody being a complete klutz or really not liking me, which is possible. You know what? And I got to say that these kind of techniques, these remote techniques, everything from the intercoms to the IFBs at the Olympics and the way that we communicate with the four-wired venues, a lot of this, and I know I sound like I'm a Chris Tobin commercial, but back in 2002, me and Chris were put in a very unique situation where it was the first time we were doing the Olympics before like the big Westwood One change, and it was post 9/11. We did not have a lot of time to prepare for this. Mr. Tobin said to me, Mitch, go into Old Six, dig around back there, find some equipment, put it together, and this was for Salt Lake City. And we went out there and we took an old router and an old intercom system and a bunch of, I'm going to say Rock 10 consoles, maybe,
Yes,
Chris?
that's correct. That's correct. Logitech, yes.
I had to learn those consoles, which learning them doesn't mean ever loving them. Sorry. And we put it all together, but we came up with a lot of concepts regarding IFBing and listening and using the intercom systems that the sports department loved. So my next Olympics after Salt Lake City was Athens. And that's where we got a big budget, and I mean a big budget, to buy a lot of routing equipment. And that's where the whole modular concept came about. That really helped me in learning how to build out permanent facilities, though. And again, that's really what my passion is wiring racks, designing rack rooms, distributing audio and data, and all those concepts we used at the latest project, the Broadcast Center, which is to completely rip out 4 routers, a ProBell router, a Trilogy router, an image video router, and an old 9500 intercom system is all being combined into one giant multi-frame system. But Kurt, as you know, we're using all that multi-pair Cat 5 techniques and those RJ21 or amp champs, whatever you want to call them. The whole system is designed that way. My plant is one of the few left that still does use patch bays. So if you can imagine coming out of the router, everything goes to a Bantam patch bay via RJ21 multi-pair Cat 5 out to punch blocks, chrome blocks. And that is the whole basis of our system. The way that we distribute out to the studios is with multi-pair Cat 5 and off-the-shelf black box rack mount panels, as well as those custom Whirlwind panels. So the remote experience that I have has really helped me kind of learn the most efficient and modern and contemporary way to break out a modern routing system in the plant.
Wow. Okay. So, Mitch, in thinking about remotes in years past, now you're doing things now with a lot of Cat 5, a lot of digital, and you're very modular in your approach. I would imagine, I'm guessing you even have, color-coded Cat 5 patch cables for different purposes. Is that true?
We do, because we delineate things by SAS data, SAS analog audio, SIM, and then of course standard LAN computers. And then again we have this will be our second time that we actually run a VLAN, and we delineate the IP codec patch cords from the standard LAN stuff. So to answer your question, yes, I am obsessed with color. I am obsessed with drawings and sheets. It's to me, it's almost as fun to draw everything and to do the complicated Excel run sheets with the paste links and the lookup tables, because I can design an entire remote, and it's been done where I literally hand it to the maintenance shop, and because I was born and raised in that maintenance shop, we speak the same language, and we've had entire internal infrastructure builds as well as remotes built without me hardly going back to ever even see what's going on. This particular one I'm going on, this is the first Olympics that I'm going on in quite a long time, since Torino. And you know what? For the most part, it's a big save as. We save the documents, we make some changes, and that's it.
Hey, okay, speaking of past Olympics, now I'm guessing that at some past Olympics, you've had some challenging moments, maybe even some moments where to hold a broadcast on the air, you had to maybe hold some twisted wires to get together, something like that. What's a good story that you've got from a past Olympics or some other big venue broadcast that you'd like to share with us? Something that almost didn't happen, some disaster averted. What you got?
I guess the best one would be in Greece. Right. I guess the second day after opening ceremonies, we had a situation where the power that we had coming into the IBC was the absolute best, of course, UPS generator backed up. That being said, we ended up doing some quick work for some updates using, a hotline of all things because the tech power had died, and we actually used a US hotline plugged into a 220 to 110 converter and connected back to the broadcast center, Chris, to the famous Studio 10A hotline. Basically stuck a microphone headset into the hotline, and Joe Tollison, I believe, maybe was the guy that literally just made things up as he went along and said, just from memory, those guys, those sports guys, man, they live and breathe.
He's good.
Really good. He ad-libbed it, and I think that was pretty interesting that we just happened to have a hotline laying around, and we did have some analog POTS lines, there for the mostly for the hybrids and call-ins and stuff like that. So that was interesting, and from a technical point of view, and in terms of highlights, there quite a few celebrities. You'd be surprised have a passion for radio, would walk in, and a lot more of the athletes than you would think would come in there. So I don't have any groundbreaking stories, but there's the power outage and the hotline, I guess, is the best one I got for you.
Well, I'm gonna, I've been as usual. Sorry, guys, just yapping. And Chris Tobin, worked for years in a similar network operations center. Tom Ray, the WROR network and the network that he works with now. You guys have got to have. I hope you have another question or two for Mitch Glider to round out the program. We've got about 10 minutes or so to go. Maybe you've got something that you can bring up to Mitch that you want to ask him how he handled something or compare it with your own experience.
Well, Mitch, as a network provider in my past and presently, when you go out a remote, maybe not the real big ones, but how do you plan for backup? How many backups do you normally have? Because obviously one good wire cut could ruin your whole day. So, what do you do to make sure that remote can continue? And if something were to happen during the broadcast, what's the backup for that?
That's a great question. I would say that for a long time, Tom, we would try for point-to-point T1s with ISDN backup, and usually we try to rig up something with the alarms from the interplex shelf with some kind of panic dial and a relay out of that would make some type of route on the audio router kind of instantaneous, and I can remember doing that a lot. And now we tend to dual and triple feed, to answer your question. ISDN, hotline, IP codec. For the recent, I guess it was a year ago this summer, for the past political conventions, that's exactly what we did. We had ISDN and IP codecs dual fed, and we always had back at the far end, back at the broadcast center, they were always fully prepared to switch those sources if one would drop out. Obviously that kind of stuff is usually board opt at the network side. So if something seemed like it was dropping out, it was the next fader over. So I hope that answers your question.
And it does, but let's go one step further. Let's say it's something like the Super Bowl. Is there actually a broadcast crew sitting in the studio who could take over if all hell breaks loose and everything goes away? For example, like power failure that happened at the Super Bowl.
That was a great that's a great question. And what we do at the broadcast center is we will have all the backup feeds actually running coordinating the Super Bowl simultaneously. And again, for those who've been to the broadcast center, for instance, we would do it out of Studio 10, Studio 6, and Studio 12, where one would maybe have the hotline potted up all the time. And what would happen is our NOC, our central control, we would have extra people listening to all three of them, and we would make the source change to the network instantaneously. And that's kind of there's nothing bigger than the Super Bowl in terms of revenue attached to an individual broadcast, so no expense is spared. So we would have 3 studios running all 3 of the paths, and then we'd have a technical crew sitting in front of the automation system that routes the audio actually to the uplink, particular uplink channel or channels in this case, ready to go.
So, Mitch, what's the latest with technologies? Is Craig still working it down the hall from you?
Yes.
So, for the news division, what's the latest you guys have been using for remotes? And I'm curious how that's been going along.
For the large-scale remotes, like the conventions, I just discussed that, and that's the SAS equipment combined with multiple backhaul IP, good old plain hotline matrices, as well as ISDNs. The big thing that I would tell you that Craig's people are using now is the Lucy Live on the internet. On the Blackberries and iPhones, connecting to primarily right now. Mr. Swagler has quite a bit of Comrex accesses that he's been using, but we have started using other codecs, including Telos Zips and everything like that, because as you know, so Lucy Live, to answer your question, to me is the biggest thing, because as you know, there's lots of third-party adapters and microphones and stuff like that. So if you plug that into an iPhone 5 with a good connection with Lucy Live, connecting to an access, I'm telling you, with the right environmental background noise under control and things like that, it just sounds absolutely amazing. So that would be the latest thing from the CBS radio people. That would be what I would think would be the most exciting. And they are doing more and more where they're using anchors, either out of their home or some other remote broadcast, to be the actual hourly newscast anchor, as opposed to having somebody in the studio. And again, they're using the IP technology with ISDN technology. I'll drop a name, for instance. Peter King works out of Florida for CBS, and we've been working very closely with Mr. Swagler and the entire CBS News team to get make sure that everything that comes into us from Mr. King is reliable. And believe it or not, there are times when the ISDN is rock solid, and that's what we go with. And then there are other mornings, for whatever reason. And as we all know, if we knew those reasons, we wouldn't, we'd be in a different place. And we've had great success over the public internet. And we are considering dropping an actual MPLS drop into his house as well. So that is really where CBS is going these days, is a lot of remote hourly anchors and reporting coming in, again, every way they can. ISDN, public internet, IP codecs, and now private cloud.
So actually, Mitch, you've taken this conversation right in perfect line for my last question. That is, where do you see technology for the kinds of things you do, both remotes and aggregation? Where do you see that going? And do you see what you might call consumer level systems and electronics and internet access and networking? Do you see that becoming more and more able to handle professional needs, or do you still see a big chasm between what professionals need to do their job and the consumer world of the things that we play with and use, like phones and such?
Well, I think that because of my musical background, recording studio background and stuff like that, there's a parallel there. There was a time when, in order to get a professional audio recording of a band or a music or any kind of musician, there was a huge disparity between what was considered home equipment and what was we call professional. And I think that Tom and Chris will agree with me that where we are now is that the equipment for professional broadcasting, both from mixing and transmission, has gotten so much less inexpensive as the technology goes up. And I just think that you're going to start seeing, here's a great example. You're going to see one day in the very near future that somebody's going to have a little box that they're going to sit down on their desk, and they're a news reporter, and they're going to plug it into the internet or connect to a Wi-Fi network. It's going to hit back to an Axios system or an SAS system or whatever like that. It's going to have 4 intercom buttons. It's going to have this, and that's going to be it. I really see that right around the corner, because we already have that with the portable IP codecs and the increased reliability, buffering and algorithms. I mean, I guess that's my simplest answer, is that the equipment that you need, the amount of money you need to spend, and the amount of equipment you need to have, and the size of it is shrinking. It's becoming less expensive. It's becoming easy to use. And as the bar for IP codecs and the understanding of all that gets higher and higher, and newer engineers and newer, either the people like us that have been in the business a long time that are willing to embrace it, or the younger people that they're brought up and they're like, they're not even going to know what an ISDN codec is. And that's right around the corner. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Well, Chris, Tom, do you have any follow-up, wrap-up questions here, as we're just about out of time?
No, interesting topic. Always is, and always good to talk to Mitch.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The only thing I will say is, for those in the audience that are listening and watching, and you're an affiliate of the Westwood One radio networks, every time you call the NOC, Central Control, be patient. The guys have a lot on their plate, and they're some of the best people you'll ever talk to that can help an affiliate. So I just got to give those guys credit.
That's really nice of you to say, Chris. And you know what? I'm just going to say really quickly that all networks, radio networks in this country, have gone through a lot of changes, as we all know, and there's more coming, a lot more coming. And I'm part of all that as we speak. Chris, I don't know if you've known this, but to the rest of us, we used to have a separate technical NOC, and we had an operations desk. And recently that was combined. Again, hats off to the Westwood One folks that are running that NOC, because they are very busy. But in defense of the rest of the networks out there, because we're not just talking about Westwood One here, everybody's doing 2 and 3 jobs where they used to do one. So, hats off to everybody. And, I just want to thank you guys for having me. I know that, I tend to be one long run-on sentence, and I appreciate your patience. And want to give another shout out to Mr. Tobin, and also say hi to Barry Thomas, who I know is on the show often. And for those who need to know, both Chris and Barry were both my directors and VPs as I was growing up at the CBS building. And I give a lot of credit to both of them for where I am today. So again, I want to thank everybody for having me.
You're too kind. It's all right. You've done very well.
Mitch Glider, thank you very much for taking time out of your day and agreeing to be our guest on This Week in Radio Tech. We've learned a lot, and it's great to get that insight that most people never see. Not even full-time station engineers out at radio stations. I've been very blessed to come visit you twice or 2 or 3 times now, I guess, up there in New York at your operations center. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks again.
All right, and Chris Tobin from the Queens studio of the GFQ Network. Thanks for being with us from there in Queens, in studio.
You're welcome.
Tom Ray from the Hudson Valley of New York in his ham shack. Hey, thanks, Tom. Appreciate you being here, too.
Appreciate being here myself. So have yourself a good evening, and see you all. Let's see. I'm not on next week, but I will be the week after.
Good. Next week, we have an interesting show, as usual. Couple of interesting people. Sanjay Jolly and Will Floyd from Prometheus Radio will be here. Chris Tarr is going to be along, too, as one of our co-hosts. He's agreed to be on the show. And we're going to talk about Prometheus Radio, from a very, very low-budget, community-level point of view. It's going to be very interesting. Check it out. Thanks to our sponsor, Axia Audio, and the Axia Rack and Desk. Cute little consoles, full Axia connectivity, and intelligence and all the cool things you expect from Axia in a small console that fits right in your rack or right on your desk, hence the name. Thanks for being our sponsor. Thanks also to Andrew Zarian and the GFQ Network. Andrew, you're the man. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you producing our show and getting it all distributed. We'll see you guys next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye, everybody.
That's all the bandwidth we can pilfer this week. Another twort has propagated, and all the transmitters and audio equipment live happily ever after, thanks to the handsome engineer and his kind, benevolent care. We'll be back next week.
Lord willing and the creek don't rise.
This Week in Radio Tech. Subscribe to iTunes and you'll never miss a show. Search for This Week in Radio Tech in the iTunes Store. Soliciting is strictly encouraged. If you like today's show, tell a friend. If you didn't like it, we were never here. Kirk Harnack's wardrobe provided by the Salvation Army and the Red Cross Disaster Relief Services. Hair and makeup provided by Penelope Garcia Hernandez Weinberg.
He's unique, wouldn't you say?
I just want to get it over with.
This ends this transmission. Tango, Whiskey, India, Romeo, Tango. Signing off. Okay.